now. I just want to be respectful of people's times. Thank you so much, everyone, for putting on your camera and for allowing Iris to take a picture. Welcome, everyone, to this webinar. And I must say, I'm really pleased that we are able to do this. We've been trying to put this together for quite a while. For those who don't know, I'm Famida Shamam. I'm the chair of CommonAge. I'm also the CEO of TAFTA, the Association for the Aged. And we're really, really pleased to see Andrew is joining us as well. Andrew is the founding member of CommonAge. So he had this brainchild and he put it all together, established in 2013, and it's been growing from strength to strength. So Andrew, a warm welcome to you and to all of our delegates. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, so we have participants from all over. We have some board members as well that's joining us, including Bindi, who's the newest member of the board. So Bindi, we welcome you. We also have our chapter heads and people from our various countries. I see Jacqueline's joined us as well. So welcome, Jacqueline. Before I go into the speakers, I just want to take a moment to ground us as to why we're here today and the organization that's made this possible, CommonAge. CommonAge is the Commonwealth Association for the Aging. It's the only accredited civil society organization within the Commonwealth system that is dedicated exclusively to addressing the issues of aging and older persons in the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth represents over 2 billion people across 56 nations. And within that vast and diverse community, we are witnessing a very significant and accelerating demographic shift. The number of older persons is growing across all Commonwealth regions, and nowhere is that growth more pronounced and more consequential than in Africa, where the population of older persons is projected to dramatically increase by 2050. And this is not just simply a statistic, it's a call to action. If the voices, the realities, and the rights of older persons in the global south are not part of contemporary conversations on climate change, on long-term care, on policy and legislation, then those conversations remain incomplete. The global south cannot remain at the margins of the global agenda that will shape the lives of hundreds or millions of people. This is why CommonAge has been very deliberate and proactive in establishing the country chapters across Commonwealth nations, especially in regions where there are no peak body or organizations that represent the aging sector. These chapters are not just symbolic, they are the conduit through which we are able to share information, where policy is translated into practice and the collective voice of older persons are amplified. And this happens from the national level upward towards the Commonwealth and to the global stage. It is therefore very meaningful that today's webinar is being led by our country chapters themselves. The presentations you will hear from Mozambique, Kenya, and South Africa are not commissioned from the outside. They are the chapters that take the lead, stepping forward and claiming their place in this global conversation. And this is exactly why CommonAge exists, to enable this kind of conversation to happen. And so today, I now hand over to the substance of today's conversation. We've been hearing about the global impact of climate change, especially from the global north, the flooding that happened in Valencia in Spain in 2024, where more than half of the people that were killed were over the age of 70, the California fires, Hurricane Katrina. We also heard about the European heat waves and the record-breaking temperatures. These are just not simply weather events. These are moments of reckoning, and older persons have paid a disproportionate price, often without adequate warning, planning, or support. We know from research that older adults face compounded vulnerabilities in climate emergencies, reliance on medical care, the physical demands of evacuation, cognitive impairment, that makes it harder to respond to rapidly changing information. And the simple reality that too many of them live alone. As one researcher had put it very plainly, older adults are treated as an afterthought. The focus falls on emergency response, not on education, prevention, and follow-up. This is the conversation CommonAge and our partners are committed to changing. Uh, Previous webinars have examined responses in the global north, in Austria, Bangladesh, United States, and the United Kingdom. But today we are deliberately turning the attention to the global south, specifically Mozambique, Kenya, and South Africa. We will hear what the climate change conversation provokes in these contexts, not just as abstract policy, but as lived reality for older persons. We've allocated 15 to 20 minutes per speaker, so I ask that they honor those time allocations. And now I move over to our first speaker, which is Miguel Marengula. Professor Marungula is a distinguished social worker and a social cultural animator, and the founder and CEO of two pioneering institutions, the MSB Home-Based Care Home-Based Health Care Unit and the MSB Integrated Elderly Care Center, both based in Maputo. Professor Marengula has dedicated his career to the rights and well-being of older persons in Mozambique, ensuring that older individuals, particularly those in vulnerable situations, have access to integrated health and social care. His work reaches into the medical and psychosocial support, legal assistance for elderly victims of violence and neglect, and community development rooted in African values of dignity and inclusion. What makes his approach distinctive is its breadth. He brings together social work, art, healthcare, and community development into a single person-centered model that has made MSB a recognized example of innovative elder care in Southern Africa. Professor Maringula, we welcome you and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank
Miguel.
you, Fem. Thank you, Fem, for allowing me to share my thoughts in this moment, this very special moment. So I don't know if you can see the presentation that side. No, this is
No,
not
we
the one I
actually seeing
wanted
your
to share.
paper. Miguel, we seeing
Yeah.
we see the paper, not the presentation.
Yes. Where is it now? Here it is.
While Miguel's pulling up his presentation, just a reminder, if there are any questions, please remember to put it into the chat and we'll have some time for discussion thereafter.
So
Okay,
can you
this is
see it
it.
now?
Yes. You can, thank you. Are you going to put it into
Yes.
presentation mode?
Yeah, there it is.
Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Good. Has Fem introduced me? Thank you for this nice presentation, nice introduction of myself. I am Miguel Marengula, as Fem said. I'm going to present you a proposal of conceptual architecture for this. For this healthy aging, climate adaptation, and resilient health system in Mozambique and climate vulnerable low
Did we lose connectivity with Miguel?
Yes, I think.
Okay. Maybe let's just quickly connect with him. apologies, everyone. We seem to have some connectivity issues with Miguel. Miguel, are you okay now?
I am back.
Okay, sure.
I don't know what's
Let's
going on. It
take
went
two.
off.
Okay, let's try again.
Let me share again. Can you see it?
It's coming up.
Yes. So I
Yeah.
was saying that we at MSB we decided to address this age inclusive climate resilience as a conceptual architecture that might influence policy development and implementation from health systems in Mozambique and also in low and middle income countries. So it's a proposal that if everybody gets involved, or probably if we get the proper funding, we might make it stronger and applicable in many other countries, as well as in Mozambique. So today I will share what is the situation of climate change, healthy aging in the global context, and why to study in Mozambique, and then has a pilot country, and then all over the other Southern African countries, and our research questions and objectives, the methodology, the age inclusive climate resilience architecture has a conceptual approach and its explanation. Our approach on climate according to the aging vulnerability pathway, the policy implications of this proposal, our scientific contributions, the future directions, and conclusive remarks. So uh, when we talk about climate change and healthy aging, we are talking about two mega trends that are converging. So they are not separate, they go together. And when we think about climate change, we see that they are more frequent lately, especially in Mozambique. I was seeing now a message on our chat that in UK they are going through uh, some challenges as well. And it's not an exception for Mozambique, and most of Southern African countries are facing the same problems. And since most of Southern African countries are low income countries, the impact is even worse because countries are not prepared to face this situation. And when we think about population aging, Mozambique is one of the least prepared countries in terms of dealing with aging. There are no infrastructures for healthcare. MSB is the only institution that is providing integrated healthcare for older people, especially for them. And public hospitals and private institutions, there is no geriatric care in any of nationwide institutions. So it's a huge challenge for us to think about how the increasing numbers of our older people, which is now about 4.5% of national population, which is almost 2 million. What is their place in terms of care and long life care, and what kind of infrastructures do we have? Because the elder people experience disproportionate health impact because of their physiology, their aging situation, the multi-morbidity, mobility limitations, and of course, their social vulnerability. So our key message is that climate adaptation strategies must explicitly address the needs of aging population. So we cannot take this leaving them behind. We need to keep them in our plans in everything that we do. So I consider Mozambique as a pilot place, first of all, because I'm in Mozambique. And since I'm in Mozambique, it's fair that I discuss it from my standpoint. And in the last 10 years, we have experienced lots of challenges, especially a Idai cyclone, Kenneth cyclone, Freddy cyclone, recurrent flooding. As this year in January, we had huge challenges. More than 300 elderly people who are benefiting from our service got stranded, and even their houses, their facilities were put in a difficult situation. And then we had to find alternative ways to provide care and support to these families because the country is not prepared to take care of, especially the elders who are excluded from the whole of the planning. And there are limited infrastructures. In rural areas, it's even worse because there are huge inequalities and there are increasing non-communicable diseases and limited long-term care services. There are no conditions for it. So during our observation and analysis, we find out that the climate policies rarely include the healthy aging in their agenda. And this is what motivated us to address this issue and develop this conceptual architecture that might be operationalizable wherever we are, which we call age-inclusive climate resilience architecture. So our questions how can healthy aging be systematically integrated into climate adaptation? And how can and resilient healthcare systems. So our objective is to develop an integrated conceptual architecture for climate adaptation and resilient health systems because we're working on health services. And we want to identify multidimensional vulnerability and to develop resiliency indicators to translate evidence into policy implementation and to support climate adaptation planning, which is lacking in Mozambique. We don't have, I don't know what is going on in Zambia and Kenya and other countries, but Mozambique, there is no clear planning of what shall be done to take care of this group of people. And we used a literature review for this project, for this conceptual framework, where we visited most of peer-reviewed articles and documents that have been published in Mozambique and all over the world. And through it, we did a thematic evidence synthesis on climate change, healthy aging, disaster risk, reduction, healthy systems, social protection, and governance. And that made us the possibility to identify the gaps that we noted that there is lack of integrated age-inclusive climate adaptation frameworks for low and middle-income countries like Mozambique. When we see the data, the information, the documents, there is no much planning that includes low and middle income countries like us. And this drove us to finding the concepts that we need to conceptualize the framework, like vulnerability, resilience, care infrastructures, governance, and policy, which are the main concepts that drove our reasoning. And that was possible to develop the age-inclusive climate resilience by including 5 new concepts that have not been addressed in most of the literature that we read has one comprehensive framework, which are the climate aging vulnerability pathways and the Mozambique Elder Climate Vulnerability Framework. And also we developed the concept of climate resilience elderly care index and the age inclusive climate care infrastructure matrix, and finally the care governance framework. So these concepts may drive us to get evidence-informed policy development, climate resilience care system, and might be able to influence the health system strengthening and also promote healthy aging and will support countries and government to achieve the sustainable development goals that they every time talk about as a discourse, not as a practice, on my perspective. So the age inclusive climate resilience architecture aims to integration instead of fragmentation. Because when we think about age inclusive climate resilience, we will be able to address all the five concepts that I'm going to explain in the next slides easily so that we may understand. So, how do we operationalize the age-inclusive climate resilience? First, we see the climate aging vulnerability pathway, which aims to explain how climate hazards generate vulnerability among older people. And the key domains of these are the exposure, the sensitivity, healthy system disruption, and functional decline in general. And the primary users for this concept would be the researchers in academia and public health professionals to address and to study the dynamics of change in climate hazards countrywide. And the expected outcomes is to develop a vulnerability pathway analysis. And as an example, we have the exposure to hazards, the continuity of care, the functional decline that the healthcare system could develop and provide proper care, especially to the older people. And then we have the Mozambique elderly climate vulnerability framework that we designed as a concept for this architecture, which aims to identify multidimensional determinants of climate vulnerability. And then its domain is on demographics, socioeconomic challenges, health systems, environmental, and governance. How do policymakers who are primary users and district planners can address these issues? And it may provide the vulnerability profiling on age, as examples, age, multi-morbidity, poverty, the access to healthcare and social support services. So, continuing, we have the concept of climate resilience elderly care index that measures the resilience at multiple levels. Using this concept, we may be able to get the individuals, the household, the community, the health system, and the governance has whole. And then those who can use this concept are the monitoring and evaluation teams, so that they can address the resilience score and benchmarking on the impact of climate change. And then based on this data, we can see as an example, the service continuity, the emergency preparedness of the country, and the community support that is needed for the communities, and the adaptive capacity that the country has to face the changes. The following concept is the age-inclusive climate care infrastructure matrix, which aims to translate the evidence of the data into implementation priorities. Using this concept, it's possible um, to look at the infrastructures, the workforce that is available, the need of digital health systems, the possibilities of using transport, the financing, and the long-term care that is necessary. And that is the main users could be the ministries of health, the disaster management agencies, and local authorities to plan ahead and make climate adaptation and investment plans for the climate changes. And as an example, we can easily produce resilient facilities and train workforce that is necessary and develop telehealth coverage and adapt emergency transport availability according to the dynamics of what is coming. And finally, the last concept of our age-inclusive climate resilience architecture is the CARE framework that aims to coordinate the governance and implementation of policies. So this could be the key domain of this is the coordination, the accountability, the resilience, and evaluations. So those who can use it are the national government and provincial authorities to address the real needs of what is necessary to be done and how can we develop and how can we maintain governance and monitoring systems on climate change and its impact on elderly people, also to other population, because it's not the elderly people are not living alone. They live with children, they live with their families. So intergenerational approach can be more integrative on this. So as an example, with this concept, we have intersectoral coordination, policy implementation, accountability, and so forth. So what are the policy implications for this framework that we are proposing is that the governments will be able to integrate aging into policies and programming and planning, and also the national adaptation on plans about the climate change and its dynamics. The health sectors will be able to develop its own plans that are effective to the objectives. And it will be possible also to reduce the disaster risks coverage. Although Mozambique is unstable, I don't know if you still hear me. It will
Miguel, connectivity seems to be a problem.
also possible to provide. Is this okay now?
Yeah, it is. And you've got 2 minutes, Miguel, but yeah, it's better now.
Okay. I hope I can finish in 2 minutes. Maybe four, please. So the health system should also strengthen community health systems and emergency preparedness, climate resilience facilities, long-term care, and digital surveillance through this architecture. Our scientific contributions bring some new concepts that for the first time, we address the first integrated age-inclusive climate resilience architecture in this proposal. And in terms of policy, this architecture also bridges climate adaptation and into healthy aging approach. And we bring also 5 operational methodological tools that are useful for the entire systems for law that are applicable across climate vulnerable countries like low and middle income countries. In Mozambique, has Mozambique and Zambia and Botswana and so forth. Our future directions is that we would like to validate the concepts that we are proposing here through research, field research, and we would like to pilot the age-inclusive climate resilience if we get the proper funding and collaborate with all our partners within Southern Africa. And we would like to develop comparative African studies on this. We would like to plan an artificial intelligence structures and GIS, as well as climate health surveillance and longitudinal resilience studies, which will ensure evidence-based climate adaptation for aging societies and also policy development countrywide. So, as a conclusion, we would say that climate change and population aging are interconnected. They are not separate. And health system must become age inclusive. And our proposal, age inclusive climate resilience, provides a conceptual framework, operational guidance, measurable indicators, and governance pathways that would be very useful. So I would stop from here, and we have the paper available. I shared with you all. So has Ndine Mhlophe said, I don't know if I wrote it right, gratitude is the seed for future generations. So I'm grateful for being part of this family, and thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Miguel. That was fascinating. Thank you so much. And I think there's just so many questions that I would like to ask around the research and also application to different countries. But I think it's wonderful that when we're thinking about climate change, this conversation stimulates the research aspect because we have to have evidence-based practice. And it's wonderful to see this foundation being laid in the global south. So we'll take some questions towards the end for all the presenters. So please put your questions in the chat box. Miguel, I also would encourage you to go and have a look at the chat box, and perhaps you can respond to some of them in there as well. But I love the idea of creating the infrastructure, because part of what we should be doing is creating social infrastructure to support older persons to live healthy and make sure we have very inclusive society. So thank you. Miguel, if you can then maybe stop sharing your screen, we'll move on to the next. I see there were lots of claps and happy messages for you, Miguel. So well done to you. Okay, so moving on, Miguel, you'll have to stop sharing though before we move on. Okay. As Miguel now, there we go. Are you good? No, you need to stop sharing your screen. Yeah. Okay, so while Miguel's doing that, let me introduce you to our second speaker, which is Richard Wayindi. He joins us from Kenya, and he's a very familiar and valued voice in our CommonAge family. Richard Wayindi is the founder and CEO of Age Watch Africa Foundation, and he's also the chair of the CommonAge Kenya chapter. With over 30 years experience in corporate financial management, spanning audit, risk management, policy, and governance across Kenya's energy, agriculture, manufacturing, and banking sectors, Richard brings a rigorous systems-level lens to the challenges facing older persons on the continent. Through Age Watch Africa, Richard champions long-term care and what he calls graceful aging, working alongside global partners, including HelpAge International and CommonAge, to advance evidence-based initiatives across Africa. Richard was honored with the IFA 2025 bursary to attend the conference, and it was in recognition of the impact of his work and leadership. Richard, it is wonderful to have you with us today. Please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that introduction, Femada. I hope I'm coming through, am I?
It's starting to share. We're just waiting. There we go. Right, we do see it. Thank you.
You can hear me well?
We can. Thank you, Richard. We can.
Good. Thank you again, Femada, for the opportunity, for the introduction, and thank you to all in the audience. I was listening to Professor Miguel going through his research presentation, and I'm wondering how to bring this across. But let me mention from the outset that my presentation is more operational based. We have looked at what is happening in Kenya in terms of climate action and its impact, and what we as Age Watch Africa and other CSO members are doing to cope with the impacts of climate action. So mine is devoid of any research. And so to start off, I want to look at what is happening on a global front. I will rely on you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Renata, for helping me through. Yeah, from that first slide, I'm looking at what's happening globally. We're saying climate change is increasingly recognized as a profound and far-reaching force shaping care systems and care as a whole, the care work globally. And researchers, including our own friend, Professor Marangula, with his proposed research, many researchers have come up to prove that heat waves, drought, floods, and wildfires, these are environmental degradation. They are intensifying care needs while simultaneously undermining the infrastructure, the service, and the social systems that support care provision. That is the case locally in Kenya as well, but it's a global situation. And these dynamics are increasing the time and the physical labor required to secure household resources like food, water, fuel, and to care for children, older persons, and those who are all injured or displaced by the impact of climate action. And we focus particularly on women because they perform the majority of the unpaid care work globally. They are disproportionately impacted by rising care demands, which constrain their time, mobility, economic opportunities, and well-being. That is a case that cuts across many countries. But now, let's take a closer look at Kenya. What is Kenya doing? Well, in Kenya, climate change trends and patterns, they manifest in observed increasing frequency and more extended periods of extreme weather events. We have severe drought, flash flooding, windstorms, landslides, and heat waves. And these affect vulnerable communities in various regions of the country. The climate change and its induced conditions in Kenya, they have induced or influenced national health status in different ways. Namely two. One, the country exhibits various degrees of exposure to hydrometeorological events, the heat exposure, the climate-related diseases, the air and water pollution, increasingly healthcare service, and the destruction of healthcare infrastructure and the nutritional inadequacies. The second way is the additional climate-induced mobility, forced displacement and conflicts over water and land resources. This is affecting the people that get displaced by the impacts of climate, whether it's flooding or drought. Next slide, please, Renata.
That changed.
Next slide, Renata, please. Yes, you're there. Thank you. So we're saying the predisposed climate conditions that we have identified above, they are compounded by the fact that there's limited access to consumption of information through health education, promotional and awareness of climate change effects. And all these act as catalysts that constrain adaptive mechanisms to the phenomenal climate impacts on health status in Kenya. These conditions significantly affect the exposed populations, especially the highest risk groups, people living with disabilities, girls, the adolescents, and most importantly for us as Age Watch Africa, the older persons who are in that vulnerable group. So against this backdrop, the government of Kenya, through the Ministry of Health, came up with the National Climate Change and Health Strategy, the 2024-2029 version. The main objectives of that strategy, in next slide, Number one is to assess the hazards that the climate change poses for the population of Kenya and the need for adaptation measures. The second objective is to promote climate change mitigation efforts. And so the overall effects of climate change are evident in constraining public health care systems as the disease burden increases disproportionately to the resourcing, funding, and development of health systems. So recognizing these impacts on population health and the health systems, the government of Kenya has put in place mitigating laws and legislative principles and policies, and these include the Climate Change Act of 2016, the National Climate Change Response Strategy of 2010. Next slide. The Constitution of Kenya itself, the 2010 Constitution, the National Climate Change Action Plans, 2013 to 2022, and the County Integrated Development Plans and nationally determined contributions updated in 2020. Those are legislations that the government has put in place. And alongside the government efforts, we have the UN Sustainable Development Goals, most specifically the SDG 3 for health and well-being, and SDG 13 that focuses on climate change actions. The government also has the Kenya government bottom-up economic transformative agenda, all that support the mitigative efforts that the government has put in place. Next slide. So we look at care, climate, and private sector development. This is where now we come in as AgeWatch Africa alongside many other civil society organizations in the country that are working to mitigate the impact of climate action on the population. So AgeWatch is at the intersection of care, climate resilience, and women's economic empowerment. Why women? Because we work largely with women. At any one time, 2/3 of our caregivers are women. So they are the ones that are most affected by this. So AgeWatch is a Nairobi-based women-led nonprofit social enterprise that provides professional elder care services to vulnerable older persons in Kenya through a continuum of care services that include home-based care, group daycare, and residential care services. The organization trains and deploys predominantly female caregivers, as I said already, to support the vulnerable older persons in those continuum of care provision systems. And this is primarily in Nairobi, the western region of Kenya, and most recently we have made entry in the northern Kenya, where we are working with the refugee population in Kakuma refugee camp. Next slide. So at AgeWatch Africa, we believe that climate change is not only an environmental issue, it is indeed also a care economy issue, a gender issue, and a livelihood issue. Women bear a disproportionately higher burden because they are both economic actors and unpaid carers within households and communities. So we find that the impact of climate change touches directly on the work we do with women. What are some climate-related shocks and stressors that we, as work along with women and everybody else, are going through? Number one, climate shocks are increasing the unpaid care burden on women. During droughts or floods and disease outbreaks, women spend more time sourcing water, caring for sick family members, and supporting older persons, and maintaining household chores as well. The balance becomes difficult for them. The second stressor is that women are experiencing time poverty. In what sense? Because many women are engaged in informal work, caregiving, agricultural work, and cooperative activities. They are working longer hours due to multiple responsibilities that go through their hands. Thirdly, older women, caregivers, they are especially affected by climate action. In many households, older women and grandmothers, they are primary caregivers of grandchildren, sick relatives, or displaced family members. Climate stress worsens economic insecurity while increasing dependence on them for care. Another stressor is that livelihood distributions directly affect care systems. Reduced agricultural productivity, loss of income, and food insecurity. These reduce households' incomes and ability to pay for childcare, elder care, transport, and the normal bills that would otherwise be cared for become a challenge. Also, care responsibility. There is a strong but often overlooked nexus between climate vulnerability and the care economy. In what sense? When climate impacts increase household stress, the demand for care rises sharply without a proportionate increase in care infrastructure and support. That causes stress for likely the women who are the primary caregivers. And also mental and psychosocial impacts are significant. Women in particular, they report stress, anxiety, exhaustion, and emotional strain from balancing caregiving income, generating and climate survival steps on strategies. The private sector is also affected in that women workers in cooperatives, in markets, in farms, and informal enterprises, they become less productive as a result of climate action. So in summary, we're saying climate change is silently expanding the care economy without proportionate expansion of support for the women who sustain it. And that's a situation that needs urgent attention. Next slide, please. So what are some adaptive strategies among women especially? How are they coping with the stresses that we have highlighted in Kenya? Well, women are creating community-based coping systems. We are seeing informal saving groups, village or voluntary savings and loan associations, shared caregiving arrangements, caregiver shifts. All these are innovations that women are coming up with to cope with the stressors. Secondly, the diversification of livelihoods is becoming essential. Women are increasingly combining small-scale farming, informal trade, caregiving, and cooperative participation to stabilize household income. Multi-sourcing, so to speak, not just relying from one source of income, and juggling as many as they can to be able to cope with the impact of climate action. There is also intergenerational support systems that are important adaptive strategies. Older women, they are often providing childcare support that enables younger women to continue working or participating in economic activities. Yes, some households, younger mothers are getting the support of older women who are now able to provide care for them as they go back to work. There are community-led care models. They are also emerging organically. In some communities, women are rotating caregiving responsibilities or organizing collective support during climate emergencies and peak labor seasons. Technology and localized knowledge are also becoming helpful. Climate information systems, mobile savings platforms, digital health information, all these are coming in handy to be able to help the older persons and the population as a whole to cope.
Richard?
So how is AgeWatch supporting the above adaptive strategies?
Richard, you have a
Well,
minute to start summing up. Okay.
perhaps two, Femada. Yeah, I'll sum up. Give me another
Okay.
minute, please.
Thank you.
Yeah. AgeWatch is supporting resilience through capacity strengthening and social inclusion approaches. These include caregiver training, community awareness, and partnerships are also critical for us. Next slide. So in summary, we are saying women are not just waiting passively for solutions, they are already innovating and adapting. However, they need systems that recognize, reduce, and redistribute unpaid care work. So Renata, if you just run through to the last two slides, I'll make my conclusion of my presentation. Yes, the next one, the last one before that, please. No. There were previous one. Yep, there. We are saying that there's need for investment in local institutions and community organizations like AgeWatch to be able to be more vibrant in the work that they are doing to help the communities, especially vulnerable ones, to cope with climate action. The next one. And actors in the sector, civil society organizations, we are saying there is a need to be able to work together. If we ignore the care economy, our climate responses will remain incomplete. Women are holding together household communities and local economies. Strengthening resilience means investing not only in infrastructure and finance, but also in the people and systems and protecting what there is already in place. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. That was fascinating. I think there's so much to take from your presentation, especially around the intersection between climate change and how that impacts on the provision of care, especially on women, with women taking on the lion's share of the care responsibilities. I think it gives us a lot of food for thought in terms of how do we build social infrastructure to support people who have these care responsibilities in the face of climate-induced emergencies. So thank you so much for that, Richard. Again, I encourage people who have questions to please put it into the chat box. And Richard, you as well, the same advice, if perhaps you can look at the questions and perhaps provide some responses in the chat box, just in case we don't have enough time to go through all of them. We now segue into the last presentation. So our third and final presentation brings us back home to South Africa. And I must declare that I have a proud bias because both speakers are valued colleagues of mine. Kamal is the Divisional Manager of Research Strategy and Development at TAFTA, and she serves as the head of the South African chapter of CommonAge. What people don't know about Kamal is that she's a published writer and she's a thought leader in the aging sector. She brings together the expertise of social work research, project management, and cross-border collaboration to strengthen elder care systems across Africa. She also was awarded the bursary to attend IFA last year, and she presented at the conference on international collaboration on capacitating the elder care workforce in sub-Saharan Africa. She's joined today by a presenter whose contribution to older persons' rights in South Africa is simply foundational. That's the correct word I would use. Ms. Civil Logodu is the Chief Director of Professional Social Services and Older Persons at the National Department of Social Development. Her policy fingerprints are on some of the most significant legislative milestones in our sector. She spearheaded the development of the White Paper for Social Development and led to the finalization and approval of the Older Persons Amendment Act of 2025. And this is a landmark piece of legislation for older persons across our country. Ms. Lekgodu is also involved quite a lot in terms of the South African Council for Social Services Professions. To have her voice in today's conversation is a genuine privilege. Policy without practice is incomplete, and practice without policy lacks any kind of durability. So having Carmel and Civil present together exemplifies exactly the kind of practitioner policy dialogues that moves our sector forward. Carmel and Civil, I now hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Fem. Renita, you're going to help me with the slides. Okay, so while Renita's doing that, just want to greet you all and say thank you to CommonAge for the opportunity to dialogue about this really important issue of climate change, and in particular, how it impacts on older persons. As I was listening to Prof. Miguel and Richard do their presentations, it was really interesting to see the parallels in terms of what our communities are experiencing. So with regards to the South African presentation, we will talk a little bit about the climate context in the country, talk about how that's impacting on older persons in various spheres of life, and then go on to the legislative and policy context, and a very interesting aspect of indigenous knowledge and how that will build resilience in terms of older persons in South Africa, and how older persons are bearers of knowledge in terms of climate control. And then we'll end with some recommendations for the government and civil society. So let's start by looking at why we need to talk about older persons in the climate change conversation. We've already established that climate change is being recognized as a major threat to older persons as global temperatures rise and populations continue to age. Miguel mentioned the fact that we are talking about two megatrends when we talk about climate change in older persons. So older adults are particularly vulnerable to climate change hazards because of age-related health conditions, reduced mobility, and greater dependence on stable social and environmental conditions. According to Help Age International, approximately 138 million people aged 60 and over were already exposed to significant climate risks, and this is accounting for 14% of the world's older population. Climate change threatens older persons' health, safety, housing, food security, their livelihoods, and overall well-being in Africa. And this is why it is so important for us to bring older persons into this important conversation. In Africa, temperatures are rising faster than the global average, and older people are particularly vulnerable, especially in rural communities where they depend on agricultural livelihoods. With regards to climate trends in South Africa, the country is experiencing more frequent and intense heat waves, prolonged droughts, erratic rainfall, severe storms, and destructive flooding. Data from the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change tells us that in 2024, South Africans experienced an average of 13 heatwave days, with approximately 80% of those heatwave days attributed to human-induced climate change. Now, these conditions increase the risk of heat-related illness, food insecurity, water shortages, and disruption of essential services, which is becoming a way of life in South Africa. In 2024, these heat waves cost the South African economy a whopping 373 million rands, according to the Lancet Countdown report. South Africans on this call will remember the recent extreme weather events that demonstrate the escalating climate risks facing our country. In 2022, we had the KwaZulu-Natal floods, and in 2025, we had the Eastern Cape floods. These resulted in significant loss of life, displacement of thousands of people, and widespread damage to homes, healthcare facilities, roads, schools, and critical infrastructure. The South African Weather Bureau, or Weather Service, tells us that there is scientific research that has clearly indicated a link between the severe and extreme weather events and climate change patterns. Older persons are among the groups that's most affected by these events because of their reduced physical abilities and health status, their reduced mobility, decreased sensory awareness, and increased risk of morbidity during, before, and after disaster situations. Older persons tend to have greater difficulty than others in replacing household items. Sorry, Renita, you can go back to the other slide, to the one before this, and just stay on that. Older persons have greater difficulty than most in replacing their household items damaged in a flood, and may also lack the financial means to recover and maintain acceptable living conditions after a flood. So in looking at the impact of climate change on older persons in South Africa, I'll talk to the physical impact, the psychological impact, and economic impact. With regards to the physical impact, older persons are particularly at risk because aging reduces the body's ability to regulate temperature, while chronic diseases and the use of multiple medications further impair hydration and the body's ability to cope with heat. Extreme heat can result in dehydration, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, increased hospitalization, and premature death, and of course, a range of other conditions. However, the problem is that these health effects are often under-recognized because heat-related illnesses are frequently misclassified as cardiovascular or respiratory conditions. Older persons who live in poverty are especially vulnerable, particularly those in informal or poorly insulated housing, without reliable electricity, cooling, clean water, or healthcare facilities close by. Social isolation further increases the risks during prolonged heat waves. Protecting older persons requires stronger heat health surveillance, age-specific early warning systems, improved healthcare responses, and climate-resilient housing and community-based support. With regards to the psychological impact, climate change and climate-related disasters can have profound psychological impacts on older persons. Floods, droughts, heat waves, and storms often result in the loss of homes, livelihoods, possessions, and loved ones, leading to significant emotional distress. Older adults are particularly vulnerable because they may already be coping with cognitive or physical decline, making recovery from traumatic experiences even more difficult. Older persons' vulnerability increases in instances where family members who were affected by the floods are not found, and the families are not able to locate or bury their loved ones, to be able to grieve and find closure. Floods can also wash away burial sites, making it difficult for family members to identify the resting places of their loved ones. The common psychological effects include stress, anxiety, depression, grief, and trauma. Older women may experience an even greater emotional burden, and this has been mentioned even in Richard's presentation, as they are often responsible for caring for family members during and after disasters. Limited social support, isolation, and restricted access to mental health services can worsen these, particularly in under-resourced areas. The economic impacts are significant and include those particularly for older persons who rely on fixed incomes, social grants, and subsistence farming. They include things like extreme weather events destroying homes, crops, livestock, and personal belongings, leaving many older adults with substantial financial losses and limited resources to recover. Older persons also often face increased healthcare costs due to climate-related illnesses, while disruptions to food, water, transport, and other essential services increase the cost of living. Many older adults who support extended families, and we find that this is really common in South Africa, as I'm sure in other African countries as well, through pensions or by caring for grandchildren. This makes climate-related financial shocks even more difficult to manage. Older people living in rural areas are particularly vulnerable because, as I said, they focus on agriculture, and crop failures and livestock losses reduce both household income and food security. Reducing these impacts requires stronger social protection programs, climate-resilient housing, accessible health, disaster relief, and livelihood support. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Civil, who will talk us through the policy and rights context, as well as Indigenous knowledge.
A very good day to each and every one of you. Am I audible? Just checking.
Yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are, Civil.
Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Let me start by appreciating and thanking you, FEM, as well as the entire, team from CommonAge, the leaders in the platform, as well as our fellow presenters and colleagues also who have joined us for discussions of this very, very important subject matter. And I want to just say also thank you to Kamal for having laid this foundation that you have taken our colleagues on the platform through. Indeed, that gives you some background in terms of the realities that are currently confronting our South African population of older persons. But the country has also put in place some responsive measures, specifically from the policy and legislative perspective, which also, ensures that the rights of our older persons are protected. And in this regard, we have indeed advanced in terms of policy and legislation development, which seeks to ensure that we do indeed protect and promote the rights of our older persons. So to this effect, we have departed from the crux of our constitution and also took some of the imperatives of the treaties and the international instruments that South Africa is a signatory to. And on the basis of that, government has developed the Older Persons Act, which provides a framework for the empowerment, the protection, the dignity, as well as the upholding of the well-being and safety of our older persons. And with that, also, taking into strong considerations their security, but also, making sure that their rights are at all times. And I must indicate that we've got very strong policies and legislative frameworks in place. The policy that we have for South African older persons has really assisted us and created a very good foundation for the development of our Older Persons Act, which we have always utilized over the years of 13 of 2006. But we have also moved beyond that because we then realized that there were some gaps in terms of that legislation. And then we came up with the Older Persons Amendment Act number 1 of 2025, quite a progressive piece of legislation that also takes into consideration a number of elements that should also ensure that we are able to protect our older persons even during periods of climate change. And we also have a national strategy that is also going to be supporting these initiatives, and the protocol on the management of elder abuse, which also would support us in terms of making sure that we respond effectively, and various other critical legislative frameworks that can guide the country's response to issues of climate change. We do have a Disaster Management Act number 57 of 2002, as well as Disaster Management Act Amendment Act number 16 of 2015, as well as the National Disaster Management Framework. And we also have a Climate Change Act number 22 of 2024, as well as the National Climate Change Response Policy. So these are fundamental policies and critical legislative frameworks that guide us in dealing with matters of climate change when such eventualities do happen. So these legislative frameworks and policies call for changes in terms of the attitudes and the practices across all levels of the sector and across the country. And these also assist us in terms of appealing to people to assist us in terms of making sure that older persons are allowed to age with security and dignity, but also they open up opportunities for older persons' participation within families and their communities, even in incidences where we do have these kinds of disasters pertaining to climate change. So we are saying through all these policies and legislative frameworks that our older persons should be prioritized due to their vulnerability, and the support that they need should also be considered during such eventualities. And to that effect, government should also create an enabling environment and guide local level engagements and planning so that they can be able to respond to climate change and related hazards such as flooding. Already Carmen has spoken about flooding and the instabilities that it brings to communities. So planning should also prioritize older persons, including our older persons with disabilities as vulnerable groups. And what we are also saying is that it's critical that mapping exercises do happen so that we are able to deal with people with ease during such eventualities. And early warning systems should also be in place. We must have our evacuation plans and recovery support systems in place to ensure that when evacuation does happen, older persons are easily identifiable. People know where they live. They can easily deal with their plights as a matter of priority with the utmost dignity and integrity that they deserve. So climate response must also be aligned to social protection and also, from a community-based care perspective, disaster management and health systems should also respond to the realities of our responses when we deal with older persons during climate change. For example, when flooding happens, we are saying in order to ensure that social protection is upheld, there should be considerations for older persons with disabilities, older persons that live alone, and all their circumstances must be taken into consideration. If floods happen, they lose their SASSA cards, which are very important for them. You've heard Carmen indicating that many of them take care of households, they are second-time parents, so their SASSA grants remain very important for them. If they lose their cards and some of them still go physical to go and collect their grants, it becomes a problem. When floods happen, people will lose their medication in the process. Some will even lose their own walking devices or assistive devices for that matter. So we are saying they should not be compromised in terms of access to services and access to support, and also access to prompt evacuation. So in this regard, it should then assist us to make sure that we handle them with the dignity that they deserve throughout. And this then also takes us to the emphasis of the rights-based approach, which means that older persons can also be given that opportunity if we plan better. We have collaborative approaches in dealing with their plights during such climate change eventualities as well as disasters. Then decisions can be made whilst people are planning, and systems can be put in place which will then assist us in terms of always adopting a rights-based approach in dealing with our older persons in such eventualities. In terms of priority actions for government, we are saying it is important that all our key stakeholders should collaborate and strengthen their efforts and initiatives towards the effective mapping of our older persons, especially in high-risk areas. Already the country is aware of areas where risks are high. We should also be knowing, in terms of such areas, which households have older persons that live alone, which households have got older persons with disabilities, and also in informal settlements where movements are difficult. So systems must be put in place to make sure that it shouldn't matter where an older person is. They should be able to receive our prompt responses as government when such eventualities do happen. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult and it puts them in situations of helplessness if we do not have such systems in place. And we are also saying the integration of older persons' needs into municipal climate adaptations and disaster risk and reduction plans is an issue that should really be elevated. So it is necessary that we ongoingly create awareness and move into the mode of making sure that there are educational initiatives that keep our older persons aware of what is happening in their communities, where do they go for assistance in the event such instances, occur, and they should also understand the resources within their own communities and be educated about such. We're also saying that those that are forming networks within such communities, our home-based carers, our social workers, our community development practitioners, our child and youth care workers, all of them, they should be sensitized to know where older persons are and where they could be located in the event disasters happen, including those with disabilities. And specifically because in many rural areas, we do have traditional houses of leaders. They should also be able to know precisely where the people are and how to then, navigate resources towards making sure that they are also considered as a matter of priority when such disasters do happen. So intersectoral collaboration remains quite critical. We're also saying that early warning messages should be spread on time, and they should be accessible to everyone. We do have radio stations in many areas, which many communities can have access to, SMSs and community healthcare workers and local structures. There are many community healthcare workers that move within communities. Pamphlets can be distributed on time and people can be sensitized about this. This can also lead to the saving and protection of older persons and also the provision of support to them in times of need. So the protection and continuity of chronic medication is something that is also important, because when people are attacked by floods or they experience floods, it becomes something that is not planned, and therefore they may not live with their basic needs. And I'm highlighting the significance of chronic medication. There are assistive devices where older persons are already experiencing disabilities, issues of food support, and their access to the grants. I've already touched on that. So there's need for us to invest in age-friendly shelters so that when such eventualities happen and we move our older persons to such shelters, they're able to be well cared for in an environment that also keeps them calm, and they are also able to have access to all basic needs. And they can also, experience safe, movements from their original homes, even though, it might be difficult because in circumstances of floods, for example, it may not be anything easy, but once they get to be moved, we should be able to settle them with ease in those age-friendly shelters, which we are advocating for. And at community level, in terms of interventions, we say it's
Sorry,
necessary that we
Civil.
create low.
Sorry, Civil, you have 2 minutes.
Okay.
All right, thank
I'll
you.
move swiftly. Yes, we are saying we need to have proper systems at community level, and such interventions should also be known by everybody. All key stakeholders should also work together. We need to train everybody and make sure that we promote relationships across all levels so that our older persons can then be assisted in such eventualities. And we are also saying there is need for us to look at key indigenous practices so that there is that kind of ease of adaptation, noting that our older persons are the owners and those people that fully have the wisdom and understanding of indigenous practices. We need to involve them in these kinds of situations. We should also learn from them in terms of some of the critical issues that would require in terms of contributing to effectively taking care of them in such situations. And hence, we're talking about the importance of their participation and also monitoring and making sure that communities respond in the rightful way. So the empowerment, of those that surround them also becomes quite critical. And we do, of course, bring forth a suggested call to South Africa. We're saying South Africa's climate response must protect the dignity, the safety, and the well-being of older persons whilst recognizing their contributions to families as well as communities. And we're also saying an age-inclusive climate agenda is not optional. It should be central to social justice and healthy aging, as well as the resilient communities. And in terms of recommendations, as I move towards closing, we are also saying age-inclusive disaster planning is very critical, and strengthening community networks is also something that really should be invested in so that there is inclusive emergency communication, and we should also strengthen across the board intersectoral and collaborative approaches between government, NPOs, and communities, as well as all stakeholders and those that seek to serve our older persons within the aging sector. But training of everyone remains critical because climate change as well as disaster management also bring traumatic experiences, including for those that would be serving older persons, debriefing as well as plans to relieve those people post these traumatic experiences remains quite critical. There's need for us to also continue with research on vulnerabilities of older persons and ensure the effectiveness of our adaptation of our interventions, and mainstreaming of traditional ecological knowledge and institutionalization of intergenerational programs where we bring on board our youth. And we're saying we also need to have a full database of young people that would have screened, who would work with us in terms of supporting older persons in such disasters, especially those that would be living alone at the time when these kinds of disasters strike. And awareness creation across the board remains something that is extremely critical. And as I conclude, I just need to also say, much as we have progressed immensely in terms of the development of legislation and policies in South Africa, we do also have policy gaps. Most critical remains the issue of policy silos, but we also still lack in terms of strengthening our intersectoral collaboration and making sure that we adopt, coordinated approaches in response to most of our issues within the country. And that would also go for our response to climate change. And core priorities for action, we're saying there's need for policy and sector integration, older persons as resilience champions, their knowledge should be utilized to the optimum. And we need to also make sure that we strengthen our frontline networks. I've just talked about also the creation of young people within communities, because when disasters strike, they still have the energy, they are able to run, they can be able to assist and help where we need assistance. But we need to screen them, because we cannot allow everybody and anyone to assist and work with older persons without us knowing who do we specifically send into their space. And ultimately, integrating the rights, health, and wisdom of older persons into climate action is essential for building equitable and resilient South African communities. And I must say that today's webinar discussions moves us in the right direction to ensure our responsiveness as countries, and this initiative readiness to assess and ensure our appropriate responses aligns well with what Nelson Mandela once said: a society that does not value its older persons denies its root and endangers its future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sybil. Oh, I always love that quote. I've used it so many times, and that's so true. It's so important for us to focus on our older persons and how we engage with them, protect where we need to, but I think also appreciate that they are holders of knowledge and wisdom as well. There's just so much that I take from the presentations, all three of the presentations. Sybil, I love the idea of mapping where older people are, engaging with them, the whole idea around indigenous knowledge, because, you know, older people know the environment. They are holders of knowledge in terms of how the environments change. And so we must move away from this idea that we have all the answers and we must engage with people and find solutions together. So it's been really, really wonderful to hear all of the inputs. To all of our presenters, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge, your field realities, and your advocacy from Mozambique, Kenya, and South Africa. There's been such a diversity of the presentations, but I think that in itself talks to the diversity of this issue around climate change and why we have to create these spaces for dialogue and for sharing. We've run out of time, but I do see that the presenters have been answering some of the questions on the chat. We will save the chat and we'll share it. In addition, we will save this webinar and have it available on our YouTube channel. So we'll give access to people to have a look at that. But I must say, you know, the work of ensuring that older people are not an afterthought in climate change planning is urgent, and it requires exactly the kind of cross-continental solidarity that we have witnessed here today. We will be sharing a summary of this webinar, but I think before I close off, Andrew, would you like to say a few words before we finally close off?
Well, for me, it's an honor to be invited to do so. Thank you very much indeed. It has been absolutely fascinating to listen to the presentations from three key African countries, and there are so many interesting crossovers. So I think this, what I've been thinking about is that CommonAge has got an important part to play in this, because we do have the ability to cross over between the domains of research, policy, and practice, and of course education and training, which has just been mentioned as well, as to how we help people to understand what we're trying to do and take this agenda more widely. I say this, you know, I'm obviously speaking from the UK, where we are experiencing the worst drought conditions that this country's experienced for over 100 years. And the number of excess deaths due to the heat wave that we've experienced in this country is now a matter of national discussion and concern. And so the global north is kind of waking up, and you referenced earlier the conditions in some of the European countries, and of course across the United States and Canada as well. Climate change is a global issue. The impact on countries such as those from which we've heard today has to be recognized, and we have to find ways to take this discussion outside our own ecosystem and into the wider Commonwealth discussions and conversations. And we will be doing that through the production of an update report on aging in the Commonwealth, which will be presented at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Antigua in November. And I'm hoping that some of what we've heard today will be reflected in the report. And Vermeer is very much involved in all of that. But it's really great. And I think these types of webinars can be very effective as a way of bringing thoughts and people together who share common ground, who are working hard at the national level to make change happen. But how can we harness that change at the local level and make sure it is reflected across the wider 56 countries of the Commonwealth? But thank you so much. It's been really interesting listening to the presentations and very much for us to reflect on. Thank you, Fem.
Thanks a lot, Andrew. And on that note, I say thank you to all of our attendees. Thank you so much for staying a little bit after the time that we had allocated. But I also ask that you look out for our next webinar, which is going to be on another hot topic around AI and older persons. So if you are interested in that space, please do look out for the notification for our next webinar, which will focus on AI and older persons and how that impacts on well-being, on healthy living. It's just such a controversial topic, but it's something that we can't bury our heads in the sand about, and we must engage and create space for that kind of dialogue. So I wish all of you well. Thank you so much. Please, if there's any comments, suggestions that you can make, we're happy to take them. Please just pop us an email and we'll take it from there. So I wish you all a good afternoon and we'll chat again soon. Thank you. Thanks, Renita, for all your support as well. Goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye. It was nice.
Bye. Oh, it was. Well done, Miguel.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.